We'll do a review in Likkutei Sichos in Chelek Chof Daled, volume 24. This is the third Sicha for the Parshas Shoftim. In the Parsha, there is an equation from a person, from people to trees in the field. Ha'odom eitz hasoda. And it almost seems from the Gemara that the comparison is a superficial comparison. In one area or trying to compare it. But the Rebbe argues that the verse says Ha'odom eitz hasoda, and we celebrate Tu B'Shvat. That means that there is a deep and inner connection between the person and the tree more than what it seems like from the superficial in the Gemara. The Rebbe will explain that the main part of a person is the tree within the person, the growing which is in the person, which is his midos, the character traits. Just the intellect by itself does not do it. You need to be able to have the midos tovos, and that is the idea of the tree. The Rebbe will explain how unique connection the tree is with its source, that it's always connected, and even though it grows outside of the source, but it never leaves the source, as opposed to the other things, as we will see. The Rebbe goes through step by step, and then the lesson is that even if you are a tree, a Talmud Chochem, you have to, even if you're a Talmud Chochem and learn it, you still got to make sure that also to be the midos tovos, to impact, and that to be like the Tzomeach in that connection. We'll go step by step. Shoftim Gimel. Aleph. From Pasik, Ki ha'odom eitz hasoda. The verse says that the person is the tree in the field. The Pasik talks about over there that when you are going to come and try to capture a city, the Torah says not to chop off the tree. And the Torah gives the reason. Ki ha'odom eitz hasoda. Rashi learns over there the pshat, but in the Gemara it says is because a man is like a tree in the field. So can't chop off a man. You can't chop off the field of the tree of the field, the tree of the field. So the Gemara, that's not Rashi's pshat, but we'll see in the Gemara. It seems in the Gemara. Frag the Gemara. So the Gemara asked the question, what does it mean? Is then man a tree of the field? You're comparing the person to an eitz hasoda. Is that true? Is it true that a man is like, or is a tree in the field? The Gemara answers like this. In this pasuk, in the first pasuk, it says, don't chop off the tree. In the next pasuk, it says you could chop off the tree. The difference between the pasuk that you should not chop it off the tree and the pasuk that you could chop off the tree is dependent upon whether it's a fruit tree or not. If it's not a fruit tree, then you could chop it off. If it is a fruit tree, then you cannot chop it off. And therefore, the Gemara wants to equate this to a Talmud Chacham who is compared to a tree. If he's a tree that produces fruit that you can eat from, then you should follow them. But if it's a Talmud Chacham, which is not proper, so then don't follow them. And that's learned out. Let's look in the Gemara, the quote from the Gemara. The Gemara, is then man the tree of the field? The Gemara answers, Mishum Elo. Mishum diksiv kimimenu toichal v'yisoy. In this pasuk, it says that because you eat from the tree, so that's why don't cut it off. But in the next pasuk, you should destroy it and cut it down. Okay, so how do we reconcile these two verses? And we're saying a tree that has fruit can cut off. A tree that doesn't have fruit, you could cut off. In this case, a Talmud Chacham that has fruit, which is compared to the tree, meaning he's a Talmud Chacham Hogun, he has fruit, therefore you take from him. If he's not have fruit, then stay away from him. Okay, so im Talmud Chacham Hogun, who, if he is a proper Talmud Chacham, then from him you should eat. What does it mean, eat? Rashi explained. Lemoid himen, learn from him. But don't cut him down, mean follow him. But if he's not a proper Talmud Chacham, then you should destroy, which means surmei olov. The comparison is not mean destroy him, but stay away from him, turn away from him. That means stay away. So here it seems like the comparison to Eitz HaSodah is just in one place, that the person is like a tree of the field. Which is the person that you should follow is somebody who produces fruit, which is a Talmud Chacham Hogu, as opposed to a Talmud Chacham She'ein Hogu, which you could cut down. But that's a very small piece of a comparing. The pasuk says Ka'adam Eitz HaSodah, seems that it's a more inherent connection, tie, not just in one detail, one comparison. So we need to understand. From them was the Gemara fragt, the Gemara's question, is that man a tree of the field? Is muchach, it's evident, as the Gemara named on, that the Gemara assumed that those was their posik vergleicht an Odom Tzeit Asoda. The fact that the verse compares a person to the tree in the field is neat. It's not just we are saying and we're trying to compare. It's nit blois val Eitz HaSoda did v'amoshu, that the tree of the field serves as a parable from welchem we can verstehen, from which we are able to understand. Eine one or a few from the Mailus Tchumis law, a few of the advantages and the characteristic of a person. We're saying, Odom Eitz HaSoda, there's things like he's like the field of the tree, so we can learn things about the Odom. That's the equation. No, because if that's the assumption that the Gemara says, why would it ask Odom Eitz HaSoda? We never said Odom Eitz HaSoda. We just want to learn some comparison. The Gemara assumes that when we said the Odom Eitz HaSoda, it means that he's actually inherently one like a tree in the field. But ob der Pasuk meint zu vergleichen sie nur in gewisse Protein. What the Pasuk means is only to equate them in certain details. Hat dann damals kein Ort nicht zu fragen, then there is no room to ask the question, is then a man, a field, a tree in the field? Because there are several, many details. In which a person can be compared to a tree in the field. So it wouldn't be a fair question to say, is then the man a tree in the field? No, we didn't say that. We said that the man can be compared. So you see from the Gemara's question, no. That the Gemara assumes that a person is more than just has some characteristic traits from a tree, or that we can learn about his advantages of that characteristic, nor as an Odom is Eitz HaSoda, man is a tree in the field. Which means, as an Eitz strikt ois, a tree expresses nitblois tailbais, not only partially, or toffeldike protim from them Odom, or secondary details of the person, or the ganze Zach from Odom, but this has to be the entire person, the entire being, the entire thing of a person. is Ha'odam Eitz HaSodeh. That's what the Gemara assumes. That's what the Gemara's questions. So what is the Gemara's answer? But the Rebbe says now that we're saying that the Pasuk is saying that a person is more than just compare some details to it. This also explains to us why we celebrate Rosh Hashanah Leilonis and we don't say Tachanun and then consider it a Yontiv, a partial Yontiv. But what's the connection to a person? If it was only a partial connection, we have to say a person is essentially equated very much to a tree. Yesh loymar, we can say Ados is oil verstandig. This is also understood from them was men sagt nit kein Tachanun Chamisha Osor B'Shvat, that we don't say Tachanun on the 15th of Shvat, which is Rosh Hashanah Li'lonis, the Rosh Hashanah of 4 trees. And says Aminag B'Yisrael to Asim Pedus Ha'ilum B'Yibzeh. It's a tradition, a Jewish tradition to eat fruit of the tree on this day of Chamisha Osor B'Shvat. It's connected to the verse Odom Eitz HaSodeh. So why would we equate that? If the tree of the field is merely an example of the person, that would not be a sufficient reason as their Odom Zol Praven, them Eitz Rosh Hashanah, that wouldn't be a sufficient reason for the person to celebrate the Rosh Hashanah of the tree if it was just externally somewhat connected. Therefore, move on. So from that we understand as Odom Eitz HaSodeh main canal. We say the man is the tree of the field means like above, as their Odom is Eitz HaSodeh. He is a tree in the field. The Farhot, the Rosh Hashanah from them Eitz. And that's why the Rosh Hashanah from Triya Shaykhs to Modna is connection to the person. So we don't understand this. It's not verstandig. Number 1, Aleph. So how does the Gemara's answer? Since we're assuming that the person is the tree, that's the main characteristic is a tree. So how is it answered? The Gemara asks, is then a man a tree in the field? So how does it answer? That if he is a proper Talmid Chacham, we eat from it. As euch der Inyan, since this idea of a Talmid Chacham that being like a tree is l'chayre nit mer v'amoshel v'nimshel from Eitz HaSodeh, we're using it just a parable and to apply it to the Eitz HaSodeh, from the Eitz HaSodeh to a person, but it's not that he is the field. We're just giving you a parable from a tree. Beis noch mer, not in a prat, but even in one detail. So we still have the same question remains. Can we really call the person Eitz HaSodeh for this comparison? Base number 2. We passed the chlal. How does it fit to betayr zayin mailas ha'odom? We're trying to say what a person is. We're saying, oh, a person is a tree. A person is min hamedaber. He's the category of the speaking. And we're saying, we're trying to describe the mitvah that is Eitz HaSodeh, that he's a tree in the field. He has the characteristic of the growing. Let it be true that by a person there's also the level of growing. The growing of the hair, the nails, but the hair and the nails, that's a greater advantage. That in Yevon he's alive. So why the growing is an aspect, but that's not basically mainly the issue is that he has growing tzemeach on him does not consist the advantage of the person. How could we say that the person Eitz HaSodeh? So basically, the Rebbe is saying we're more at this pasuk, and the Gemara's assumption is that it's more than just some sort of something to learn out from the tree, but it's more. But how could the Gemara answer? What is the Gemara's answer? That in one parable we can learn out from the tree about which kind of a tree to eat, the fruit, which kind of a rabbi to follow, a Hagan or not. That doesn't seem to cut it to be Adam Eitzasoda. And the Rebbe wants to know, why would we try even to compare the person to the Eitzasoda when there is so much more about the advantage of the person? The person's a medaber. So why compare him to this? And the marshal from the Gemara is just a very small part of it. And the Rebbe will begin to explain now that the essence actually of the Maila of a person is the Tzemeach that's in the person, as we will continue seeing. Noise base, the Rebbe will begin to explain the Maila, the distinction of Tzemeach, the growing things, as related, as opposed to the Medaber and Chai. And then the Rebbe in Ois Gimel is going to explain the advantage within the Tzemeach, the mile of trees versus the other Tzemeach. So let's look inside. Base. The mile miyuchedes Oisgeteiltkeit von Mina Tzemeach legabe Medaber Chai, the special, unique advantage, the distinction of the type that grows relative to the Medaber Chai, by state in them consists in the fact was verdeckt nicht behalten, that he doesn't cover and he doesn't hide. Sein Emes and Chai is what is true life. You can always tell by the tree where his life comes from. Is ständig mechuber durch seine Sharoshim zu sein Moker. Through his roots, he's always connected to the source, which is zum koyach hatzameach sheba adoma, to the power of growth which is in the ground. Was macht ihm leben und wachsen, that makes him alive and grow. Wenn man reißt up hatzameach from der adoma, when you tear away the growing thing from the ground, then he's no longer a growing thing. To remain tzemeach, he has to stay connected to the ground. That means that you always, when you look at a tzemeach, you see how he's connected. By Chayim Medaber, on the other hand, when we talk about living, the animals, and the speaking, the human, gefindt man nicht, as a soll müssen sein zugebunden, the Shorshim Mekoyim. We don't find that they need to be tied to their root and their source. They're not tied, connected to the ground. As is given the hisabus from which they were created, because everything comes from the ground. Also, from the type of Chai Medaber, everything comes from the ground. Everything comes from the ground. Noch that hisabus laid of yeder Chai Medaber, after the birth, the creation, birth of every living and speaking of the Chai Medaber, is a nit behaftun zu sein Shoyrish Moker. He is not connected, he's not tied to his root and source. Was hat ihm geboren that gave birth to him. Euch der Mosen von Chai Medaber, also the nourishment, the food of the Chai Medaber is in a way as a darfon nit stehen in a chibur mit dem Moker von dem Mosen. They don't have to stay connected with the source of the food. The food comes from one place and then they eat it separated. Mashe'enkein by tzemeach, as opposed to the growing, was ständig mechuber zu dem koyach hatzemeach sheba adoma, which is constantly tied to the power of growth which is in the ground. Now, the Rebbe says, We look at it a little bit more closely, you'll see that there is also a chai that also is connected to its source, which is by the fish. By dogim, we find similarly by fish. As müssen sich ständig gefinden in Mayim, they must always be in the water. Mekar chayusum, that's the source of their life, is the water. They need to always be there. Wenn sie seinen Pötschim min hayam, as soon as they separate from the water, miyad hemesim, right away they die. And in a way, the Rebbe says, in a way, their connection is more than Semech. They bleiben mit their ganzen Metzias in their mocker. They remain with their whole entity, the whole fish, everything remains in the source, in Basar, into the water. Aber, but however, the Rebbe says, while that is true, but that exactly is the reason that the special novelty by the tree, that it's not in the water, it's not in its source, yet it is connected. But he has the Hanisenes. That is actually what tells us. In them gufe is a chidush by tzemeach l'gabi dogim. Here itself, the novelty by the growing relative to fish. As oich when they wachsen al pnei ha'adam chutz l'mekoyim. Even when they grow on the face of the earth, away from their source. Bis beimer was wachsen hecher from gimel tfachim. Trees that grow higher than 3 tvachim is still considered kilovu domi. But and then the asset tvachim, sometimes they grow 10 tvachim. These go very high, still, notwithstanding their growth. So by the fish, yes, but they're covered. But here they're growing, and still, still they are constantly connected to their roots that is in the ground. And through the roots, with the power of growing, which is in the ground. That's one reason that Tzemech is stronger than even these dogim shabiyam, because while they're separated and still they're connected, they're growing and connected, as opposed to fish which are in the water. But the oid, and another distinction between badogim is that dag proti klal nit verbunden mit seinem mocker bechayis proti. The specific fish, he's not tied with his source of specific life, which means all of the marine life, the fish comes from the water, but different parts of the water. Sometimes it's created on this water and the other part. But a gate, but he can go over, go from a river to the sea, so which means that while he's in the source, but it's not his specific source, the general source of all fish, which is water, but not his specific for. He goes to another spot in the water, but Tzemeach stands where he was growing, that's where he comes from, and that's where he stays. And soon the Rebbe will mention there's actually an exception when you put in a lot of effort, you can move a tree from place to place as well. But as we'll see later on, the Rebbe brings out that idea. Now, in Ois Gimel, the Rebbe explains that within the growing thing, there's an advantage of trees over other growing things. Gimel. In them gufes, farana yisr and maili neitza sode ilomis. In this itself, there is an advantage. In the tree of the field, which is trees, Lagabe andere tzemachim relative to the other growing thing. Andere tzemachim, other growing things, vitvuas, for example, grain, priha adomo, or fruit of the ground, vegetables, they don't remain in existence as a growing thing connected to the ground, mishana l'shana. They don't remain from one year to the next year, which means they farliran zeir mitzias, they lose their existence. So they no longer exist. Takeg and ilonis, seine moitzi pedis mishana l'shana, as opposed to fruits, they produce fruit year by year. They don't lose. The tree stays all the time connected, so that he can always produce fruit. The same tree, which means the trees they can the tolerate all kinds of changes. The summer, the cold, the winter, etc. And their existence is not interrupted. Was das weist, if a gor stark in Chibur mit Moker Chayusam. That points to a very strong connection with the source of their vitality, that despite all the different seasons, they can still stay connected. Was gitten sehr rein a Teich of God, and because they are so strong connected, this gives them such a strength of nicht spoil them from Shinui Hazman, not to become impacted by the change of time, bleiben bikiyumam, to remain in existence, and further, and also to keep growing from year to year. So, that's the advantage of trees over other growing things, or vegetables and other things which die in the winter or the season only that they live on, or grain. Tree stays and actually grows in all seasons, and therefore that represents the strongest of connection. So now we spoke about and we showed how, first of all, growing things, and especially trees, have a unique quality that they are very strongly connected to their source. And now we'll transfer that to the person. The person is a microcosm of the world. So just like in the world, you have the Daimim Tzameach Chaim Medaber, the person also has these four in his small world, in his microcosm of the world. And the Tzameach is the Midos, and then you have the Seichel, the intellect of the person. That is like the Chai. And as it's movable, as he's going to say there. So the main aspect is going to say the connection of the midas to the source is greater, to the neshama is greater than the intellect to the neshama. Dalet. That Adam is an olam kad. The person is a macrocosm, a small world. Punkt wie der olam gadol is eingeteilt in vier sugim, just as the big world is divided up into the four categories. Doimem, the inanimate, Sameach, the growing, Chai, the living medaber, and the speaking. So also by the person, also in his spirituality, Faran, Odi Firsum also has the spiritual sense of it. He has these four categories. And as it's known, as the midas from them mention that the character traits, the emotions of the human being, they're the growing of the soul of man. While in the midas is faran inyan hatzmicha mekatos legatos. The growing is because in the emotion there is the idea of growing from small to large. As a beginning, a child has small emotions, wants small things, and it grows. The emotions grow to one bigger thing. In koyach haseichel is faran, but in the intellect exists nidlois that inyan for tzmicha bakatos lagatos. Not only from the small brain to more understanding, from small to big, it also is living. Was drikt sich ois, which expresses in tenua v'shinui memokum lemokum, it changes, it moves and changes from place to place. V'abal chai was bavekt sich memokum lemokum, as a living thing. It's not like a tree which is stationary, but rather it goes like an animal, goes from place to place. Likewise, the intellect is not tied, which means mugder is not defined, untergeworfen, and it's not under the boundaries, definition, to ein tava, to only one nature. Seichel is in yonit zu verstehen azach. intellect understands an item. Need the imvilsk, not how you want. It's not your emotions, nor bidizach is as is to examine the idea as it is on its own. Azoi as there is hoylech umeshana mokim, so that the intellect can go and change place. Amol zu chesed and amol zu gevura. Sometimes the intellect will say kindness, sometimes it would say stringency. By ein inyan is maskonas haseichel as a dav zayin chesed. One idea, the conclusion of the intellect, it needs to be kindness. And by zweiten inyan, by another inyan is kavura, that needs to be stringency. So, mashenkin midos mitzad atzmo. But when you look as opposed to the emotion on their own, without getting the intellect involved to change the midas, but midas on their own, seinen mugder in zeir teva, they're defined, they are limited, they're bound by their nature. Midas achesed bleibt mitzad atzmo in kava chesed. The measure of the characteristic of kindness remains in the line of chesed. Likewise, midas hagvura remains in the kava gevura, in the line of stringency. As is nor was a vaxen the katnos legatus. It is within the chesed, within the gevura. They grow from small to big. But so seichel is compared to chai, moves around, changes. Midos are stationary, but they grow in their place, like the tzemeach, being chesed or gevura, they grow in the chesed. So before we discuss that there is an advantage of tzemeach in his connection to his source, so the Rebbe is going to learn the same thing applies to the tzemeach by the person, which is midos, that it has an advantage over the seichel, which is the chai in the human being, in the microcosm of the world. Hey, kishem v'tzemeach in olam gadol, just as the tzemeach in the big world. Is detailed canal is distinguished, as said before, with their maila, with the advantage. He's always connected to his root. Similarly, is also by the level of tzemeach, by the person, by the level of the emotion. As the habun amayle iber seichel, that they have an advantage, the emotions over seichel, over the intellect, because davke zei seine ständig mechubet zu shoshim. They are always tied to their root, pnimius nefesh odom, to the inner soul of the man. This is also the reason for vos midis, that why the emotion, regesh alev, the feeling of the heart, habmim in zich, they have in themselves, as we see, atekev godel, they're very forceful. Bees, as is gor shver, as is olum mishana mokum zayin. It is very difficult to change. An emotion is very hard to change. Sich bite to change yourself. As we spoke by a tree, that they stay always there. They're always connected. They don't change. Anisha chesed b'shtivoy, a kind person naturally, is gor shver as erzol nishtane werden. It's very difficult he should change to sein an isha gevura, to be a strict person. The opposite. If naturally you're a person of gevura, then it's hard for you chesed. But the Rebbe says no. It doesn't mean that you can't. It's possible, because also a tree can be moved from its space and then replanted elsewhere. That notwithstanding that it's difficult to change and it stays, but meklech is it is still possible. Choches is nit rogel, it's not the common. Nit al derech haroiv, it's not the usual, not majority. A mensch ken sich misgaber sein mit sein seichel lekteva midos. A person could strengthen, overpower with his intellect over the nature of his emotions. Bisa says ken mishana sein for alatov. He can change himself from bad to good. Azoivi by Elon is also the same thing as by trees. Is durch der Tirche Yiseda. The extra trouble from Oiker Zayin Mimekoimon to uproot them from their place, or to plant them elsewhere. They do grow in the new place. Unamo sometimes beser umbeyeser says even better with more force in the first north than the first. So it's possible. It's not the common. So most of the time, the person's emotions they get stuck by it, but you can change it in some cases. Und das Guf ist euch der Tam, and that itself is also the reason for was Seichel wird nicht mugder in Teva HaOdom. Seichel does not become defined by the nature of the person. Bimirzen, as we see, as a mensch can verstehen, a person can understand, bis zu Teufel he can grasp fully an inyan was hebech teva, something which is against his nature, but intellect can take it. Al der Seichel, the Chai Sheba Odom, because the intellect, the living of the person, is begolui on a revealed way. Is not so openly connected to his source in the soul. Punkt wieder Chai in der Olam Godel, just as the living thing in the great world, who does not have like a tree its continuous connection to his root. So that's why the intellect can change, because it's not so steadfast connected to its nature, to its person, as opposed to the midas which are stuck there. So now this will give us the understanding of Odom Eitz HaSodom. The meat, Bov, when Pashtain will understand was the Posik Zoki Odom Eitz HaSodom. The Zach von Odom is, what is a person? It is Eitz HaSodom. Is Eitz HaSodom Kinal Sifalev. That the Posik is saying, this is what a man is. Basically saying, Eitz, meaning the emotions, that is the person. But Davke in the Midas. Because it's specifically in the emotion. The growing within the person. Kum tareis begilui. This brings out openly their root and source, as it is in the inner of the soul. Yes, Lemar. So therefore we can say, as the far, therefore is iker havoidus odo, nit azoi in yana seichel, nor be iker, person's avoida work is not so much to work with the intellect, nor be iker in bidu. Mostly it's the emotion. It's the aids of the person, because that is which expresses the essence of the soul. The correction of one's character traits touches the inner of the soul. And that's why a person reaches his wholesomeness specifically through this service. To the extent the emotions are so, the character is so important, that this actually brings in wholesomeness in the intellect. That what is the shleimus ha'odom v'seichel ha'odom v'yodato, when there you know, it is accomplished through sein poil sein of the midas ha'odom, is by impacting the emotions of the person. When you bring to your heart. Das is what the Gemara is masbir, and this is what the Gemara says. As the inyan from ha'odom eitz hasoda, what is the idea? Person is man of the east, the true, the field. Gitzach in them, it expresses in them was in Talmud Chochem Hogun Hu. What is the meaning? If he's a proper Talmud Chochem, then you eat from him. The pirush from Hogun is the meaning of proper. A Hogun is as by the Talmud Chochem is faran nit normalus haseichel. That not only does he have the advantage of the intellect, limud, study, nor as sein seichel bavirt seine midas, but rather that his intellect impacts his character, his traits. Was das bringt him zu Firzach in Hogun, that leads him to conduct himself in a proper way. And specifically from such a Talmud Chacham, from him you should eat. For him, from him you should learn and receive. Ha'odom eitz hasodeh. Ha'odom, when are you a man when you're a tree? Then is man an odom b'shleimusay. When are you a real man? From them a man can learn, and from whom you can learn. That means eitz hasodeh, when you're like the tree in the field. As b'chinas etzemeich shaboy, that the level of growth that is in you, your midos, when you are odom, when you're an eitz v'tzloi, is kidaboilim heavy, when they are proper, when your influence, your seichel goes and corrects and has the proper midas, proper emotion. Zayin, Shem Bidos is by Yeda Yochid Bifrat, just as by every individual, specifically, their own level of Tzemeach, the emotions brings them to the highest level, and when the intellect is like the emotion, so Al Derech Zeh is B'negei to close Am Yisrael similarly is as it relates to the Jewish people as a whole. Alle Eden stammen from the Gimel Ovis, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. So here we say, when we talk about Yidden, where do we come from? The three forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, which are the Midas, Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. Und das ist in an Euphonas, sie seien ständig verbunden und mechuber mit Ovis. It's in a way that we are constantly, the Jewish people, we are constantly tied and connected to the forefathers. Rashi says on the words Kibereish Surimar Eno in the Parshas Balak over there. So like Bilam said, Bereish Surimar Eno. How does Rashi teach? And in the Stakel Bereishiso Betchilas Shorashem. I gaze, I look in the beginning and in the opening of the roots where they come from. Baniraya Isom, Yusodim, the Chazokim, I see them based and strong. Chulu Aidei obviously is by the father and mother. In was drückt sich aus der Verbund von jedem Yid mit the Gimel Ovis? In what expresses the tie of every Yid with the three forefathers? Not so much in the idea of the intellect, or dafka in the minyan hamidus, specifically in the aspect of the emotions. Kidu, as it's known as the Gimel Ovis Zainen connected the Gimel Midas. They are corresponding. The three of us are not intellectual, but this is the midos. Ava, Yira, V'rachamim. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, so Ava, love, Yira, fear, awe, and Rachamim, compassion, Klolos, Kolamidas, which encompass all the emotions. So what is our connection to our Father? It's an emotional, to connect to the emotion. They inherited for their children that follow them ad olam for eternity or the midas, this emotion. Azoi, as bechinas ha'oves ha'nefaran tomid b'chol zman v'cholodom, that this level of the forefathers exists always, every time and in every person. Was their tam der frefis? What is the reason? How do we have that? Is that inyan ha'yerusha is verbunden mit netzem from Yiddish and Yiddish. The idea of inheritance is tied to the essence of the inheritor and the person who inherits. And the Riber, those was the obvious of Iber gegeben, the B'neim Achareim in an Eufen from Yerusha. This that the forefather passed along to their children that follow them in a way of inheritance is nit azoi farbunden. Mitzeyer Madreg is not so much connected to the level of the forefathers. In Seichel Vasogas Elokus, how they understand and grasp godliness, Ledugmas Madregas Avrohom. For example, the level of Rom Seichel Hanel Mikol Rayin, that he was a level of Seichel which is higher than anything that can grasp. The highest level, Atzilus, the highest levels of Seichel. But Seichel Hod Begilu Nit in Zich Kol Kach, because Seichel doesn't have openness so much that Chibur with the Etzem Opinius, because Gitz Chibur Birusha, the essence and the inner which passes along through inheritance. But those is verbunden mit Zeir Avodah in Midas. But the inheritance and what they give over to their inheritors, to all of us, all of Israel, is the one that's connected, the service is connected with Midas. Ava Yirevrach. Bald das die Teva Midas Shlem is verbunden mit Pnimius HaNefesh. Since that this nature of Midas is associated with Pnimius HaNefesh, and that's what the Moirish gives the Yoirish, that's what the father gives the son as inheritance. So what we have is mainly the idea of the emotional level of the forefather. Ches. One of the lessons that we need to take out very simply from this idea, the Moker HaChayis from Ha'idin is Torah. The source of life of a Yid is Torah, came Hayim. Aber the Seder HaChayim for Reiv Bnei Odom is Oizgestalt, but the order of life of most human beings is set up Givot Al Pi Torah. This is the setup the way Torah has it. In an Oifel, in such a way, as Torahsim Umnosim is Meotimai, that those who have Torah as their crafts, that's all they do, that's few. Ubechlal Yoshve Oihel, and in generally, he says those what sit in the in the tent, which is his Yashvus Be'ohol Loshel Torah. That means they are settled in the tent of Torah. So the Torah says, besides these exceptions, Torah says that you don't only sit and learn Torah. And that's not like Nidvi Dogim Shabiyam, was ständig mit Not these, most people don't do this. Not like the fish in the sea. That's most of the time are not in the source of their chayis, not in Torah. There's a gay in that race in belt, but they go out in the world. And there they need to fulfill their mission. Their shlichus, to make for Hashem a dwelling place in the lower world. We have to remember, as a Odom Eitzasoda, man is like the tree in the field. He needs to always be tied to the source of his chayis. The chayis in Torah mitzvahs was sarat bakumen. That passion, vitality in Torah mitzvahs, which he received, Zayin big baholo shel Torah, while he was in the tent of Torah, Eiders is gekommen the Zeit von Lirder. Before it comes to the time that he started to chase, as the Mishnah says, that when you start chasing after Parnosa, darf man im bleiben ständig, needs to constantly remain bis, as I feel that it needs to feel as it is, it's zugebunden zu jener's man. Now he's tied to that time when he was fully engrossed in Torah. This haste by him darf mit sein der Hergish, shouldn't feel by him as a tamol gelernt in a cheder yeshiva. Once upon a time, he learned the cheder yeshiva. And the gedenkt it's was a tamol gefühlt getan. He remembers now that which he did in the past. But I feel it's them verbunden in his mouth. But rather he feels now the connection to that time. Bis, I feel that this is ein chayis. He feels this is his present chayis. And then besteht sein Metzias, and that's what his existence consists of. Even while he's away, he needs to feel connected. While he's not in there, not like the fish, but still needs to feel connected. Correct as if he's now in there. The other hand, those who do spend their time in the tent, as it says, it's not sufficient just to learn Torah. Because just with the intellect, was in him sein and in which there is changes, is the talking for Sicherung. There is no guarantee. As even after they leave the tent of Torah, you should stay properly connected, tied to Torah. When der limud is in an eifel. It's only when you're learning in a way from that you bring it to your heart. Wer Teure eingekritzt in der Menschen, the Torah becomes engraved in the person, an eifel from Moshe Nisi, in a way that it doesn't change. Was for a Matzvah soll sich nur gefinnen, any situation he finds himself, like der zugebunden zu Moker Mayim Chaim Torah mitzvahs, he always remains tied to the source of the living water, which is the Torah mitzvahs. This is Mesichas Motzei Shabbos Parshas Vayira Tovshin Lametes, Shabbos Parshas B'Shalach Tovshin Mem.